So, hi again. This is Alex and Thomas. Today, the third part of our connection from the data to BigQuery from Google products. And today we talk about Google Sheets. So, what do we need to do to set up Google Sheets import to BigQuery? What are the issues you could run into? How do you need to set that up? How do you need to prepare the data beforehand? And all those things are going to be discovered today. Have fun, stay tuned, and watch the video.
Okay, then hello, Thomas and me, and we are talking now about Google Sheets. Yes, or especially Google Sheets to BigQuery.
Yeah.
But maybe at first question would be, what is for you the biggest advantage for Google Sheets? Because I think the cooperative thing to work with other people on one Google Sheet, I think, is one of the biggest things.
Yeah. So normally when people ask me, why are you using GCP, like Google Cloud Platform, and not AWS or Microsoft or whatever, it's like Google Sheets is one of my biggest points I pitch, because I think the integration possibilities you have with Google Sheets, compared with how easy it is to integrate it into basically BigQuery at that point, is it's a big advantage, and it really makes a difference in any BI setup. Because what you should not forget is that with Google Sheets, you basically have a real-time data input machine where multiple people can work at the same time, and you have the data immediately in the database. So you don't need to import it, you don't need to have like daily, hourly import cycles. So it's there right now the moment you type it in. And this is one of the biggest advantages, I think, for working. This is one of the advantages to work with GCP.
You also see which people are currently inside the Google Sheet, right? And you see which cell they're currently selected and so on, and writing something. That's quite good. Yes. So, and for sure, because Google Sheets is part of this GCP thing or Google Cloud.
It's not thing. Basically. It's not. So Google Sheets is basically Google Workspace.
Okay.
Yeah, and then but it can be seamlessly integrated with GCP.
Yeah. So you can put all your data from Google Sheets also in BigQuery. Yes. So at first, how is the integration working? The integration working. You select in BigQuery. You select that you want to create a new table, and then you have to do some setting or set up that stuff for sure. So at first you have to set your data set, maybe it's already pre-selected, and you have to give it a name. Most of the time, for example, we for sure give them a proper name, which fits to the data, and then underscore GSheet that you already realize in your table name, which is later than it looks like a normal table, but due to that it's a little bit different because it's just a connection to a Google Sheet. You call it the mostly underscore GSheet at the end.
Alex, explain what's the biggest difference in terms of the table then, if it's a GSheet connection. So maybe beforehand to explain it, when you connect a Google Sheet, it's basically a view on the sheet itself, right? So it's not a physical table.
Yes.
This you have to keep in mind.
And when one person changes a thing in the GSheet, it's immediately, or let's say after a second, it's also in BigQuery. So it really fetches the data.
Yes and no.
The data
yes and
GSheet.
No. And this is the biggest difference, I think. That the moment you change something in the sheet, it's not immediately transferred to the database, but when you ask, like when you query that table, it will have a link to the spreadsheet itself. That means there will never be data flowing from the spreadsheet to the table automatically. It's only when you query that table, they will ask in real time the spreadsheet for the data.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference. So that's not a physical storage of data at that point, right? It's just a link.
Yeah, and due to that, for example, it makes also sense that when you have a GSheet table, that you don't have the preview tab in the data, because
for this reason, right?
Exactly,
This is the main reason for that, because there's no data inside at the end. And this is why this is why we basically call those tables GSheet tables, like name, whatever name you choose, underscore GSheet.
Yeah,
that we see, okay, this is just a GSheet link and not a physical table in that case.
Yes.
Because I think you don't see it in the icon, right? It's the same icon as the table, correct?
Yeah. I think it's still
that would be a good improvement of Google if they basically change the
you
icon
see
before
partitions
the table.
and so on, and these, what is it called for analytics? We had in the
view?
past the view things.
The view, partition tables,
And how are these called, these analytics and GA4 and UA4 data, when you have these events underscore property name?
Do they have a
because
different
then
icon?
where you can set the dates you want to select.
Sharding.
Sharding. Yeah.
Do they have a different icon?
I think they have a different icon for sharding.
Let's check after the video, and we will basically show right now here the different icons.
Yes. So after we set the data set and the table name, then I think it's already the most critical point is the structure. To set the structure, you have two different possibilities. You have the auto structure possibility, what then Google or BigQuery checks on its own the structure of the GSheet, and if it's worked properly, then you get, for example, then for the first column you get then the proper name. It works most of the time, especially when really in the first line of the GSheet is then the name of the column. Then it works most of the time. And it also checks then the data type of the column.
It never works for me, I can tell you.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I do wrong, but every time I try it, it's not working. What I normally do is like always make it manual, because I'm so annoyed by the problem is you make all your setup steps, you make automatic detection, you say okay, save. It didn't work, and you start all over, and this like freaks me out. That's why I do it manually all the time.
I also do 95% of the time. I always do.
But probably it's a quite good idea to find out what is going wrong and what's the reason, because then in the future it would work better.
But for example, also and there we are also coming already to one other big topic. When you have this manual structure, you can then set field name, data type, and I think if it's optional or required or nullable or whatever. Yes, and there comes already one of the other things. If you do auto structure, and for example you have in one column just integers or floats, then it's also recognizing it's integers or floats. But if you then have in line 11 a string out of any reason, maybe it's correct. Because, for example, you have IDs and you're starting maybe with just integers, but then sometimes or somewhere you go to IDs which have also a character inside, then it's not working anymore. So due to that, we say in nearly every case, we import everything as strings, because that's easier, and then we can do it with safecasts and so on. We can properly do everything in the SQL queries.
Recommendation from our side at the end would be build your own test case. Take a data set, create a spreadsheet, import that spreadsheet to a table, then create a new query, say select star from this table which is connected to a sheet, and then inside the sheet you do some changes and you check what's working, what's not working, right? This we did yesterday because we checked something, and because some months ago or some years ago we could even say we had very often the problem that when your GSheet table in BigQuery is basically part of a bigger ETL, and you query that particular table which is connected to a spreadsheet, we had very often the problem that this particular step was failing. And I think the reason was that if people were in this spreadsheet and had a certain cell open or were working in that it was failing. It seems like that is fixed. So we could not basically trigger that error manually yesterday. Whatever we tried, it was working, which is a good thing at the end, right? So I think that issue is gone. But what can we say about basically those query errors? First of all, Alex said it, if you do manual automatic detection of basically your columns, the problem is it will auto detect the basically type of the type of the data type. This is first of all good, but on the other side, if you only have integers, let's say you only have 3 values at the beginning, there's a 5, a 9, and a 10 inside, for cost, for example, because it's quite structured cost, and then the 4th entry after you created the table is basically 0.2, then it will fail. So your whole query will fail because your basically column is marked as integer value, and if you type in float value, it's obviously not working anymore. That's why, first of all, structure your GSheet in a very good way. That means if you give it to an external group of people who are entering basically different numbers, then validate all fields in a correct way. If you say, okay, this is a number or floating value, validate that field as a floating value, that no one can type in ABC or something like that.
Already in the GSheet.
Already in the GSheet, yeah? Not in the table. Already in the GSheet. If you don't do that, so if you don't have your GSheet validated like from A to Z, like completely, then do the following thing: import everything as string. You can later convert all your basically columns into floats, into integers, and so on. And therefore, BigQuery has this formula save cast, right? So probably for the ones who do like SQL queries already, you have this formula cast where you can say, okay, from a string, you convert into an integer or into a float, and you have the same for save underscore cast. The big difference is if this is failing because you have a string which is normally a float, but you have an ABC inside, then obviously the formula cannot convert ABC into an integer, and your whole query, including your whole ETL, which is basically where the query is part of, will fail, which is obviously not your goal. So if you do save cast, it will at least don't give back an error, but in that case give a null value back, which is at the end what you need.
Yeah, better. Yeah, exactly. Yes, so that is important. Yeah, so as we said, so manual structure is always the better ones. You can also put it in the text field. Then you have to separate it by pipes, I think, by pipe symbols, right? It's also possible.
Comma. I think comma.
Comma? Could also be.
Yeah.
Because I
it's basically so if you so there is a structured way on entering that. Probably see it right there. You have the field name, the type, and nullable information, and so on. If you use the text format, then it's name, colon, the type, comma, next column, and so on. So when does that make sense? If you have a lot of information. So imagine you have a spreadsheet with, let's say, 30 to 100 columns. Yeah, select the first row, go into your text editor, and then you need to know your text editor quite good, because there are a lot of like really helpful shortcuts, depending of if you are on Mac or on Windows, where you can really like then structure this and reformat, and we can give you some tips maybe in the description about Mac and Windows. We are more the Mac users, so we are not that good in Windows shortcuts, but that helps a lot.
Yes. So then one other thing is for the setup completely, is to check that in the advanced options, I think it is, to set the headers, now lines to ignore, I think it is called, to 1 at least, because in your first row, most of the time, the column name is inside. sometimes it also can be that that the real data is starting at line 8, for example, due to any reasons, because you do some descriptions above or whatever. Then you say, okay, please ignore the first 7 lines.
What do you need to select there if you do auto structure? 0 or 1? 0, right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Because I think he needs the first line for the auto structure.
I think
right?
so, yeah. Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I think then you can also allow checked rows and so on, but that's not so important. Yes, so then you have your GSheet table, or your GSheet
It's not a
data
table.
in your data set. Then you can query them as all the other tables, but as we said, for example, previous not available and so on. But the changes of the GSheet are already then also in the BigQuery table or BigQuery reference, whatever. Yes, if you go to the details of the Google Sheet, of the Google reference in BigQuery, you also already see the link to the GSheet. You need for sure access to the GSheet with your account. So if you don't have access to the GSheet, you also get an error, then permission error in BigQuery. So that is important. Yes, and I think we didn't say it, but yeah, before, especially now, before this thing changed with this error when somebody is editing your GSheet, we always materialize them. It's still sometimes not bad to do it, I would say.
Yeah.
So what we mean with materialized is we also call them the final tables _MAT, is that we just do something like select star from GSheet table and create or replace table underscore MAT table. That is already. And then you have, so what is just doing it? It reading the GSheet data and pushing it to a real table in BigQuery, and that every hour, every minute, as much as you want.
So
every
then
day.
The downside is obviously you don't have the latest data inside. So if you do that every hour or every day, of course your Materialize table will have then status quo of when you basically created that table of the spreadsheet. If someone in the meantime changed something in the spreadsheet, your data will be not 100% up to date. The upside is, first of all, you can be 100% sure that it's working. Yeah. If this materializing is not working for whatever reason, right? Because there's wrong data inside, there's data errors inside, which can happen. So if you didn't validate everything the right way, and if you do not import every single column as a string, you always can run into errors because someone typed in basically wrong data types at the end. Because this is what you don't have under control. When multiple people are working with that spreadsheet, you don't know what they are basically typing in. So be aware that errors can happen. If you materialize them, the upside is that if the query is failing, it's not overriding the old basically materialized table. So at least you have your spreadsheet values inside. They might be they might be not updated. They might be 1 day old, 1 hour old, 2 hours old, but they will be there, right? If a very good example is marketing cost, where we use spreadsheet input the most with our customers is manually marketing cost, where we don't have an API integration, very often for influencer data, for example. There, of course, on this sheet, multiple people are working. They are entering new data points. If an error is inside that spreadsheet or the spreadsheet cannot be imported, then if you are not materializing that table, then you will have no data at all. Right? The moment it crashes and there will be an error, you have no data for influencers. If you're materializing that and it's failing, you have maybe influencer data which is 1 day old or 2 hours old, but it will be there. Like all the days before, they will be there. And this is a big difference and makes basically the whole integration way better.
Yes, exactly. I think.
Last thing maybe we can mention is that it also makes sense when we talk about materializing to make a snapshot of your spreadsheet table every day, right?
Yeah, okay.
Just as Alex said, select all from this basically GSheet table and append it to a history of that spreadsheet table, and then just append every day the whole spreadsheet. And so you have a daily snapshot of all your data. And if someone deletes that or would like to see how things are changing over time, you're still able to do that.
Yes. Yeah. So okay. So then I think we can quickly summarize everything. Google Sheets, really powerful tool, especially when you're working with a lot of people on one sheet. It's quite powerful. Then you should use it, especially when you're already losing a lot of Google platforms and Google services. Yes, the transfer from Google Sheet or the connection BigQuery to Google Sheets is quite easy. Mostly do the manual structure thing so that you set up the structure of your BigQuery reference or your BigQuery table. It's most of the time better. Import everything as strings if it would be always better, and then to do safecasts. As we said, Materialize table could be also a good, at least fallback or backup to have. Yes. I think.
Or validate your
fields inside
your
the
fields.
GSheet. Yeah, exactly. Yes, I think we do not have so much Google Sheets stuff in our blog posts, but it's still worth to check it out.
We should do it.
But I'm also not the biggest expert in Google Sheets, especially.
That was a very good introduction for the end of the video. You're doing a good job.
I had time to think about it. So yes, so I think we can also push maybe this Google Sheet thing in a lot of ways, because I think still a lot of companies are using Google Sheets.
How many companies are still using Excel as their main BI tool, right?
Their whole BI
80%? I don't know.
But maybe better than to use Excel or something already a step forward to use Google Sheets.
It depends on your environment, right? If you're on Azure and Microsoft, okay, we cannot say better than to use Excel. But for basically people who are using BigQuery and GCP, and most of the people who are watching this channel are obviously more the Google users, then Spreadsheet is of course a very good way to work. And test that, try that. It's really nice. And it makes a lot of things easier. But don't forget, at the end, everything should be in the database and should be structured. And do not make your whole BI setup based on sheets, because somewhere this will go to the wrong way, I would say.
Yeah, so then, YouTube videos we already had before, the Google Analytics and Google Ads connections to BigQuery, so that you can also check out. LinkedIn, we still post stuff from our other colleagues and so on in Coburg and in Berlin. And we have our newsletter, so also check that out for the newest Twitter analytics. Yes, then. Yeah.
Follow the channel, stay tuned.
Yes.
And see you in the next video. Bye. Guys.